Hello, genealogists. It's Craig again from Just Genealogy. Today, I want to talk to you about Quartermaster Records. Quartermaster Records are pretty much untouched by genealogists, except those that have been picked up by Ancestry, Family Search, or Fold 3. So I'm going to talk about some of those, and then I'm going to talk about some of the other things that are available. Let me let you go through my process for how I research a record group. These are found in Record Group 92, and they are the records of the Quartermaster General. So there is a United States Army Quartermaster Museum, and they have a website, and they also have various history, research, historical kinds of things going on that website that if you've got somebody associated with quartermasters, it would probably be worth taking a look at. The next thing I'm going to do, once I've identified the appropriate websites, is I'm going to go to the website, archives.gov, and I'm going to then go directly to the microfilm catalog by clicking on Research Our Records. Now, I've got a YouTube video on the NARA microfilm catalog that you might want to take a look at if you haven't done so already, so that you can understand what I'm going to quickly go through here. So what I would normally do is I would copy the microfilm catalog entries for Record Group 92, the records of the Office of the Quartermaster General. And notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different microfilms. One of them is over 200 rolls, so it's identified as 2 lines. And then over on the right-hand side, you see available by partners, available in catalog, that kind of thing. So I usually blow it up a little bit larger so that I can see it. And so here we have applications for headstones and military veterans, 2 series, indexed quartermaster claims, burial registers of military post camps and stations, the records of the Sultana disaster, all these kinds of things. Register of Confederate soldiers, sailors, and citizens who died in federal prisons. So these are the things that are originally available on microfilm before there was a subscription database. So these are the things most likely to get done by the various subscription databases and available. If you go out to archives.gov and you type in the search parameters partners, that will get you to a screen that will allow you to select by record group. And again, this is Record Group 92. So I've selected all the Record Group 92 things to look at them. Notice that it says complete, not started, not started, not started, complete. The truth of the matter is the Army Transport Service lists incoming and outgoing passengers are not only started, but they are complete and available on Ancestry. So my purpose in going to this partners page is to see if it's just listed. If it's listed, I can then go to it. Now, when you click on this page and go to Ancestry.com, it will take you to an institutional Ancestry.com, not your personal Ancestry.com. So make sure that you're using your personal Ancestry.com when it comes time for you to look at these things. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Guide to the Federal Records, which is available just like the microfilm catalog is, and I'm going to look for records of the Office of the Quartermaster General. And this is where I know that this is Record Group 92. And I'm going to wander through this, and we'll wander through this together for a little bit. As I've said, these are Record Group 92, records of the Quartermaster, Office of the Quartermaster General. 1774 to 1985. So this is a big deal. There is a finding aid or 2. However, finding aids on the archives.gov site are difficult to deal with because they're all part of an original microfilm publication that they've just put the microfilm publication up, and you can't download the entire finding aid except doing it page by page. But if you go to catalog.archives.gov/ID/178396157, that will take you to the document where the 2 finding aids are found. The first one is the preliminary inventory of the textual records of the Office of the Quartermaster General. This is NM81, Part 1, Headquarters. And notice it's the same catalog number, but if you go to screen 205, it will take you to the title page of NM81. This is Headquarters records. Field activity records are found in NM85, which is a supplement to NM81. So for that, you want to go to screen 460. So knowing these two go to screen tabs, 205 and 460, will get you to the finding aids. I'm going to be showing you pieces of the finding aids as we go along. There is an administrative history on the quartermasters that can be found on the web at archives.gov, and you can see when you learn how to interpret archives URLs, sometimes you can tell exactly where they are. This tells me that this is in the Guide to Federal Records, that is in record group 92, see the 092.html #92.1. If we back up a little bit to what we were looking at before, you can see right underneath the words table of contents, the 92.1. So it's taking you to where, if you were to click on that 92.1, that's where you would find that you would end up with this URL. I sometimes do it like this just because it's quicker than having to go to another place to find something. So the first Quartermaster General was appointed by the Second Continental Congress in 1775. It was abolished after the Revolution in 1785, where the quartermaster came under civilian control. It was reestablished before the War of 1812, but its functions weren't clearly defined. It took another 30 years for them to get their act together, and they decided that they were responsible for providing barracks, quarters, hospitals, storehouses, offices, and stables. Now, for example, providing hospitals does not mean they're providing medical care. It means they're providing the facilities. And this would include the inspection, construction, repair, and provision of furniture and fuel for those facilities. They also were responsible for transportation of Army troops and stores, storage and transportation of Army supplies, Army clothing, camp and garrison equipment, and providing horses to the cavalry and the artillery. Also supplying food in the form of forage and straw for said animals. These functions basically revolved around supplying the Army with clothing, subsistence, and general purpose equipment. It supervised the disposition of excess and salvage supplies. It performed duties relating to the disposition of combat dead, including maintaining of national cemeteries. This is where graves registration comes into play. Responsibility for procuring land for the Army. This is where bases, posts, camps, and cemeteries come in, and they were responsible for constructing and maintaining military buildings and utilities on these bases, posts, camps, and cemeteries. And they had responsibility for transporting troops and supplies. This is why you find that there's ships in the Army Transport Service, because during World War I, they need to transport troops to Europe, and it's not the U.S. Navy doing that, except for Marines. The Army is using quartermaster-controlled Army transport ships. So there are records relating to function. They're basically accounting and finance, and there are indexes to all of these things. This only becomes really important if you've got a name or a date, a contract. You may find in the consolidated correspondence files things like broadsides where a quartermaster is requesting beef, wood, forage, straw, carrots, corn, could be anything. There are also some strange entries too, like reports on the wastage of hay in the Department of Texas in 1877. I've never looked at this, but I think that I want to, just for fun, just to see. I have, as a side note, in Record Group 217, there are horse claims for the Mexican War, where you can track a guy with his horse that he shows up with to the mule he goes home with. But it relates in some way to this. There also are the Gold Star mothers and widows from World War I. There is an entry 1906. Everything in a record group has an entry. And this register is a volume, 3 inches, and it's arranged alphabetically by state. And they're under alphabetically by county, and they're under alphabetically by name of the several trips that mothers and widows took to Europe after World War I. There are records relating to supplies purchased, issued on hand, inventory, those kind of things, copies and abstracts of contracts with related letters sent for 100 years, and then copies of civilian supply shipments. So it may be that if you're interested in a specific quartermaster, a specific quartermaster sergeant, or a civilian, whether they be part of the quartermasters or whether they be contractually doing work for the quartermasters, you may be able to find information in this area of the records. Now, for those civilians that are hired, there's about 100 years worth of records that relate to civilians hired and articles hired. So if they needed a driver, they could hire a person. If they needed a wagon, they could hire a wagon. And these are in entry 238. And as I say, they cover almost 100 years, just up to before, just near the end of the Philippine insurrection. So in some of the material that I found out there, I'm looking in this case specifically for an Adam Smith who in the mid 1840s, it was reported in his family that he died in Mexico. Now, because somebody dies in Mexico doesn't mean it's Mexico. It could be Mexico, Missouri, or it could be Mexico, Maryland. But this guy actually was in the Mexican War. That's what happened in the 1840s. And there are two series of records, one entry 444 and one entry 445, that deal with Teamster enlistment contracts in the Mexican War, 1846 to 1848, and Teamster and laborers enlistment contracts in the Mexican War, 1846 to 1848. That first entry, entry 444 of enlistment contracts, is generally arranged by initial letter of surname of Teamster. And then entry 445 is unarranged, and some of these contracts are duplicated in series 444. Of course, Adam Smith, I found him in entry 445 unarranged, so I went through all 6 inches. It wasn't that bad. So here we see Adam Smith, this is his contract with the Quartermaster Department as a Teamster and a laborer. And we also learned from this that his actual name is not Smith, but Schmidt. So that takes care of that. Next is the issue of cemeteries. They're responsible for the administration of national cemeteries, so they have lots of information that relates to cemeteries. One of them is correspondence, reports, telegrams, applications, and other papers relating to burials of service personnel. These are the burial case files that go up to just before World War II. So during World War I, Pershing said that the bodies were not going to be sent home until they won, until the war was finished. So what they would do is they would inter bodies in temporary locations, and then at the end of the war, the Quartermaster Corps went out and fixed things. So next of kin were notified that they had a choice. They could either have their relative returned to them, or they could be buried in Europe. And this is what created the American Battle Monuments Commission. Every time that an individual was transported from Europe to the United States, he went with a person, an escort. And the trip and everything associated with the movement of that individual from Europe back to the United States, or from some other place in the world back to the United States, or somewhere in the United States to another place in the United States, is found in a burial case file. So there's a couple of these online. This is the burial case file of Joyce Kilmer. If you don't know who Joyce Kilmer is, Googling. He's worth knowing. And he was killed in Europe. He was in Headquarters Company, 165th Infantry. And so this is pieces from his burial case file. And these are found, Joyce Kilmer specifically, are found online in the online public access section of the National Archives. Here's another piece of that. So he was killed the 1st of August, 1918. There also is a card register of American soldiers buried in Russian cemeteries. These are the individuals that died either as part of Operation Archangel or in the Siberian expedition. So these have not been picked up by anybody. So if you've got somebody who died as part of those two different invasions of Russia, this is the place where you're going to find those card registers. Now, there are specific national cemeteries which are identified in the text of the federal catalog. There are also post cemeteries. Now, one of the things that is identified in this set of post cemeteries are the reports, burial lists, and other records of post cemeteries in the Philippine Islands, Puerto Rico, and Cuba from 1894 to 1917. The Spanish-American War created the U.S. Burial Corps, as did the continuation of the Philippine insurrection. Two different teams, one went to Cuba, one went to Manila, went out into the countryside and disinterred the soldiers and sent them back to the States. Those in Manila were sent back to San Francisco, where the remains were then sent to next of kin, and they were buried in the next of kin actually buried them in family cemeteries, civil cemeteries, those kind of things. The records of the Manila piece of this I've touched, and it included probably a 5x6 or 5x7 vignette of how the guy died, what date, what was involved, who was involved, those kind of things. Then normally they were buried in church cemeteries temporarily. So you would get a plat of the church cemetery where they were buried in that church cemetery. Usually they're in color. And then there would be the transport document taking them back to San Francisco. So I once traced somebody from dying in the Philippines to Manila, to San Francisco, to a cemetery, I think Govans in Baltimore is where they ended up. There are also burial registers for military post camps and stations, and they cover a wide range, about 474 images. And these are originally the microfilm publication M 2014, and these are found on Family Search. There are various sets of records relating to the furnishing of headstones. M 1845, which is card records of headstones provided for deceased Union Civil War veterans, 1879 to 1903, about 20,000 images, is found on Family Search. You'll notice in the top and looking here, the portion that came from the actual finding aid, someone has written in CM-1845. This is quite common to find in finding aids to save you the trouble of querying where the records are, only to be told that they're available on Family Search, Ancestry, or Fold 3. Now, there are also applications for headstones for U.S. military veterans, 1925 through 1949. These almost 1 million images are available on Family Search, but they're in black and white, so as best that I can tell, what I've looked at, Ancestry has them also, but they are in color. So you can look at them, but they're by name. And here's an individual, Nathaniel M. McGahee, who is buried in Louisa, Virginia. He was in the 23rd Virginia Infantry CSA. So this is a application for a Confederate headstone. I always try to make sure that to look on the back to make sure there isn't anything written there. Usually they're just stamps, but on occasion there is something written. So here is the case of Floyd P. McGeorge, who was in Jasper, Alabama. He served in the Army. He's a barracks guard. And on the back, it details information about his enlistment, his re-enlistment, his discharge and re-enlistment and discharge. So he was in for a while, but it's the back that you see that he was in a tank company. And you don't necessarily see those re-enlistment and discharge dates anywhere except on the back. You may also find promotions on the back of the cards. Although I just showed you a card for a Confederate, there are records of the Office of the Commissioner for Locating and Marking Confederate Graves as part of the Great Reconciliation during the 1880s, 1890s. We began burying Confederates also, as well as Union soldiers. And you can always tell a Confederate tombstone because it's got a pointy little top, whereas a Union headstone is rounded on the top. So there is an interesting list of register of Confederate soldiers, sailors, and citizens who died in federal prisons and military hospitals. This, years ago, was a Border Bun CD. It's been published many times. It's been published on CD. Its title varies. I've seen it titled as Confederate Soldiers, Civil War, 1861 to 1865, but really, truly, it's only those who died in federal prisons and military hospitals in the North. So you get the impression it might be all the Confederate soldiers, but these are just the Confederate soldiers who died in prison camps and military hospitals. You may be interested in claims, especially if your individual was involved in dealing with the quartermaster. So this is where you would find those. There is an index to claims that you can get to through archives.gov, through the catalog. As I've said before, I always type people's names into that catalog the first time I have a name and to see what pops up, and generally nothing does, but every once in a while something does, just often enough for me to always want to do it. There also are personnel records with letters sent, letters received, those kind of things. There's a central records section that deals with specific subjects. Part of the central records are letters sent in the main series, and those are also on microfilm M745. If you're dealing with an individual quartermaster, you may be able to find records that relate to them also. So M1999 is the index to quartermaster claims. That's what you're actually getting to when you look in the archives catalog, and a bulk of them are Civil War related. If I'm looking for a quartermaster or a quartermaster sergeant or a civilian that might have some connection either through a contract or as an employee, this will probably be the first place that I'll look. And then then M745, the letter sent by the Office of the Quartermaster General main series. So that's 107 volumes of record copies. Could be fun to wade through those. Now, one of the neatest things that's happened in the past few years is the records of the Army Transport Service have been put online. These are the incoming and outgoing manifests for ships leaving from the U.S. to Europe and from Europe back to the U.S. In the old days, before they were put up, you would have to know the name of the ship, you would have to know the date it left and from what port it left and what unit, and there would be various card indexes that you would play with in order to get to that information. It's much easier to deal with now. You'll end up with ship manifests that will provide you name, rank, unit, service number, and next of kin, and the date of departure and name of the ship. Very simply. You always want to make sure that you get both the incoming and the outgoing manifests. If there should be an outgoing under all circumstances if they ended up in Europe, because it's the only way to get there. There may not be an incoming because they may have died and you don't know it. So that's something you might have to look at. So these are the various entries that actually exist. Actual entries that Ancestry has online are the list of incoming passengers and the list of outgoing passengers, entry 2060 and entry 2061. But there are card registers that deal with list of vessels leaving the United States to transport troops to Europe, and card register vessels leaving the United States to transport troops overseas. So there actually are two different kinds of card indexes, depending on whether they're going directly to Europe or not. So the Army Transport Service is on Ancestry. It's very easy to use. You just plug a name in. You just want to make sure you have the right guy. The various manifests are of varying styles. So there's no one style of manifest for some strange reason. A lot of it probably has to do with the year and the port and who's in charge of that port, which quartermaster is in charge of that port. Now for World War II, the missing air crew reports are out there on fold 3. It must be that they're here because equipment was lost. That's the only thing I can think of, but I have no idea. Remember that the U.S. Army Air Force is the entity here, not the United States Air Force. That doesn't occur until after the war. So there are other records out there that you may be interested in, dealing through the entire period of the office of the quartermaster, but the ones that I currently am most interested in is the list of Union soldiers with unknown burial places. And that's entry 631. It's 4 feet. And basically it identifies all the people who died that they don't know where they're buried. Next time I'm in the archives, I'm definitely looking at that, seeing if I can get it, see how it's broken down in a way that I can deal with it, since I really don't want to photocopy or photograph 4 feet if I can help it, but there may be a piece of it that I can deal with in order to understand it better. The other thing is personal histories. If you have a quartermaster, meaning an officer, or a quartermaster sergeant, there are personal histories in Record Group 92 that probably you would find of interest if your ancestor was one of those two kinds of people, quartermaster or quartermaster sergeant. Well, this has been Craig with Just Genealogy, covering Record Group 92, Quartermaster Records. I will tell you that I will break some of this down later on in the future and do deep dives into some of these sections like headstones, like the list of Confederate dead, those kind of things, and spend shorter periods of time on them, but do a deeper dive. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's time to subscribe, I hope. Click that bell so you're notified every day at noon that something has shown up. Recognize that that's the royal we, recognize that I may be putting out more than one video a day because of the discount books that we talked about yesterday. And I appreciate you. Nothing more to say. Have a great day.